Call the meeting to order. Roll call, Maria Okpara, I'm here this time. Rick Raleigh. I'm here. Gary Arce. Here. Amanda Buchanan.
Here.
Dennis Bender.
Here.
Nobody is absent. Amanda, will you please lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you so much. Kylie, do we have any public comments pertaining to a specific item on the 9/18/2024 special meeting / workshop agenda?
We do not.
We go straight to the discussion information presented through Trinae Nelson.
Board, we are excited today to offer a workshop regarding the work around our multi-tiered systems of support. And I'm fortunate to have Susan Isaac, a trainer from Safe and Civil Schools. So I'm going to read Susan's bio, which seems very strange because we feel like we know her better than what this says now. But Susan Isaacs began her career in education teaching children with emotional and behavioral disorders. For over 17 years, she worked with student populations in both elementary and secondary schools. In 1994, she took a position as a behavior consultant for the Kentucky Behavior Consultant Network, which evolved into the Model Schools program, Kentucky's behavioral initiative, and later the Kentucky Instructional Discipline and Supports, KIDS project. In this role, she worked with school teams throughout the state, guiding the implementation of school-wide positive discipline policies. Several years ago, Susan founded Behavioral Solutions, a company that allows her to continue to work with schools as an educational consultant. We have Susan here through Safe and Civil Schools, and she works directly with each of our school sites around the Foundations program. And that is teams from each of our school sites have teams that are representative of administration, teachers, classified staff members. And they work on a system on the campus that needs to be addressed. And they're here this week. Obviously, that's why Susan's here. So we tried to do two things at once. So she's been here since first thing this morning, been working with staff, and is here to do the workshop with you. We are very fortunate that Susan is the person that we get to work with in Apple Valley Unified School District. So welcome, Susan Isaacs. She's the guru.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thanks, Renee. Welcome, everybody. Glad you're here. I am always delighted when I get to speak to school boards about this absolute essential work that we're doing in schools. First of all, I'm going to tell you that, I'm sorry. I'm from Kentucky. And so you might detect a bit of an accent. If you don't understand something that I'm saying, ask one of the staff members because they're probably used to my accent by now. They'll figure it out. But I am delighted to work with Apple Valley. We've got several of our consultants from Safe and Civil Schools working in a large capacity here. And you all are one of our favorite districts across the country because we know the good work that's going on. My goal this afternoon is to give you an overview of the work that we're doing as it relates to the implementation of a multi-tiered system of support in your district. So I've got a kind of a PowerPoint for you if you want to take a look at that, and I'll call your attention to several slides. So the goal for me this afternoon is to provide that overview of PBIS, which is called Positive Behavior and Intervention Supports. Just as an aside, it used to be called PBS, Positive Behavior Supports, until we got a cease and desist letter from the public broadcasting system. And they said, you can no longer use that label. So I guess somebody got ready and threw an I in there just to make us different. So we want to talk about what it looks like, what it sounds like. And then I want to be able to answer any of your questions or address any of your concerns about any of the work that we're doing. To that end, I'm happy if you just say, hey, Susan, turn on your mic when you want to ask a question. So here's what I say to your teachers and your staff members. If I'm in a place that I can't stop immediately to answer your question, I'll just go like this. And that means you can put your hand down. I've got you in the queue. I mean, I'll put you in a queue in my head. And then as soon as I can stop, I'll be happy to answer your question. So if that works, that's where we'll start. I don't want to insult anybody this afternoon, but I think it always helps if we start with a little vocabulary. I was married to a man for 39 years who was not an educator. Unfortunately, I lost him about 4 years ago. He called us the alphabet people. He said educators use more acronyms than anybody on the planet. So he called me the alphabet people. And you can see up there, we've got lots and lots of acronyms. The very first one that you all need to be aware of is something called Every Student Succeeds Act. And Every Student Succeeds Act is, in fact, the Elementary and Secondary Education Act that Congress has to reauthorize every so often. Now, you probably, if you've been on the board very long, you remembered its predecessor. Everybody remembers its predecessor, which was, anybody remember it? No Child Left Behind. And so ESSA replaced that in about the middle of the Obama administration is when they finally, after 16 years, got around to reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Part of what that act mandates, because Apple Valley accepts money from the federal government, do you not? What are some programs that are funded by your federal government here? Anybody know any of them? Title I, right? Title II. So we're talking about transportation, we're talking about lunch program, we're talking about Title IX. So we get a lot of money from the federal government. The federal government says, if you're going to take that money, you've got to meet the mandates. And one of those mandates is that we have to demonstrate that we are providing a multi-tiered system of support. Now, before we really started using the MTSS label, we were using something called RTI, response to intervention. You all probably remember hearing about response to intervention. It fell out of favor because a lot of people assumed that we were only talking about academics, that we were only looking at interventions for academics. But MTSS is far more encompassing than that. So it really requires now that we build a system to support youngsters, yes, at academics, but also behaviorally and social and emotionally. And that's a mandate from the federal government that we do that. Now, it does not mandate that we do PBIS, positive behavior and intervention supports. But when we're looking at how we support all three tiers a behavior, the only way I know to do it, and you heard how long I've been around. Was anybody doing that math? When Trenae told you when I started, did anybody do that math? I'm old. I've been in the education business for over 40 years. So I don't know of another way that we build supports for all kids, for some kids, and then that very few kids that does not involve positive behavior and intervention supports. It is a widely accepted practice around the world, not just in the United States. Other countries are also using that model because we know that it has a great track record of supporting youngsters with behavior. So PBIS is, in fact, a generic term. No one owns it. Now, there are people who try to tell you that they own that term, but they don't. So safe and civil schools who employ me, you heard Trenae say that I'm an independent contractor, but I've been an employee, well, not employee, I've been an independent contractor with safe and civil schools for over 24 years. I actually left my district in Lexington, Kentucky, in order to do this work because of the work that we had done in Kentucky, and I saw the huge impact that it had on schools there. So Safe and Civil Schools is one of the national providers of PBIS. Every state has theirs, some local entities. I think probably your local county may have a model that they use. And there are only minor differences in all of those models of PBIS. We tend to believe that ours is superior, as does so do those other people. But we do believe that what makes ours better is that it comes with a plethora of material that teams can reference. You've got part of the material right there. I'll point you to some of the stuff in that book that we've provided for you later. Foundations then is there's another one of those alphabet people words. Do you see SWPBIS? School-wide PBIS. We'll talk about how that works. but that's what Foundations is called. So that's what I've been working with this week. We've had teams from so far 5 schools so far, and we'll have the remaining schools the next 2 days. Teams from those schools will be working with me. We get down to that last bullet. What you have in front of you is our classroom management text called CHAMPS. So then that moves out of the school-wide into what we do in the classroom. It is actually a compendium of the effective teacher research. We clearly know what effective teachers do in the classroom. We also know what ineffective teachers do in the classroom. So this provides a roadmap for teachers. It's not prescriptive per se, but it's a framework for teachers to make decisions based on what we know happens in an effective teacher's classroom, make decisions about how they want their classroom managed. Its companion piece is for our 9 through 12 schools, our classrooms, and that's called Discipline in the Secondary Classroom. Those texts are almost identical. We gave you the CHAMPS one just because it was, I don't know if we had more of those or not, but you've got essentially everything that we've given every teacher in Apple Valley about how to manage instruction. I'm going to talk specifically about managing instruction later on this afternoon, but I'd like to start with just talking a little bit about foundation. So we're going to go from school-wide, and then we'll get down to the classroom. And if you have questions then about either one of those, we'll answer them. I think we're also going to build in a break. I know I teach a lot of adults every day, and I know it's hard to sit for more than about 45 or 50 minutes before you need to get up. So I've asked Pat if he'll kind of help us build in a break. Are there any questions or concerns or comments about our vocabulary so far? Everybody cool? Everybody good? All right. So foundations, again, is not prescriptive. It's a process. And the thing that makes our PBIS process different than any other of the PBIS processes is the entire staff is involved. Now, it's led by a representative group. Those are the folks I had here today, but they go back and they share information and elicit information from their colleagues. So this is not a group of teachers who, if we get a new principal, go, wonder what the new principal is going to do about behavior. A new principal, honestly, when they walk in, they need to know these are the kind of kids that are in the building. This is the skill of the staff that I have. So they don't really need to come in and make sweeping changes about behavior any more than they would come in and make sweeping changes about the academic program or the curriculum that we're offering. So this way, the entire staff is involved, and we look at a comprehensive approach to behavior support. I want to talk about the 3 tenets that really make this work. That's in that little gray box at the bottom. So let's talk about the first one. The biggest piece of foundations is that it's proactive. And I know that's a buzzword that's been around and people overuse it. So if you're taking notes or if you're just in your head, I'd like for you to just think about prevention. We do so much more when we look at ways to prevent misbehavior rather than try to figure out what to do after the fact. Let's face it, we don't have a lot of options in terms of correcting youngsters after the fact. We have to follow California Ed Code in that regard. And so we get way better bang for our buck if we spend time thinking about how do we prevent misbehavior. There is an analogy that's probably close to you all that you may not even realize. The analogy that's close to you all is right down, I don't know what road it is. I guess you'd go 15 and then you'd get on 405 and you'd get off at Anaheim. Does anybody know what I'm talking about? Disney. They are masters at what we're attempting to do, and that is preventing misbehavior. The way that they organize and structure the routines and procedures in those parks, and the reason they do it is because they hire 200 behavioral psychologists to help them think about how do we make sure that when people are spending, what does it cost now? I haven't been in a while. Too much. You're spending a lot of money and you're standing in line most of the time you're there, yet everybody who leaves goes, dang, that was fun. Can't we go back? Even though you just spent $500 and stood in line most of the time. How do they do that? Well, they do it by structuring that park so that we prevent a lot of angst and people have fun. And that's exactly what we want to do through this work is we want to prevent as much misbehavior as we can. Just this week, we had an excellent example of what I'm talking about. So one of the schools, help me out, Pat, the menu, help me out. Mariana. All right. Mariana has the way their kids line up in their cafeteria. It's a very long line. They have to come in going. Kids were having a really hard time. The line was getting bogged down because kids were looking at, what are we going to eat today? What are we going to eat today? You know what they did to solve that? Put a menu board at the very beginning of the cafeteria, and kids can now read the menu. They know what they want even before they get there. And I know that sounds like a little thing, but can you imagine how much that sped up the line? And now we don't have people going, come on, let's move, let's move, let's move, let's move. And now a kid's going to get mouthy with the person who just said, let's move, let's move, let's move, let's move. Because some of our kids get mouthy, don't they? So the very first thing that we want to think about is that it's proactive. We want to prevent as many misbehaviors by looking at the structures that we can modify as we can. The second big idea, this you have to know a little bit more about behavior in order to get. But the best way to change behavior is not through punishment. It's real clear. I have a master's degree in applied behavior analysis, and I can tell you this, that the effects of punishment are not very durable. Do any of you all have children of your own? Have any of you all ever had to say to your child, this is the last time I'm going to tell you this? And the next day you told them the same thing? Am I right? The effects of punishment are not durable. The very best way to change behavior is through positive measures. You'll know that because if we weren't on TV, I'd ask you all to tell me a behavior of your own that you've attempted to change recently. You know, those New Year's resolutions we come up with every year, and we generally don't do very well on those. But most of us, if we're attempting to change our own behavior, very few of us set up a punishment system to help us meet that goal. Instead, we usually set up something that we're like, okay, I did it. So now I've earned, or I'm going to give myself permission to. I really have a hard time exercising. I'm on the road all the time. So I let myself maybe on Friday night have one glass of wine if I've been to the gym. So most of us think like that. We've got to get everybody to understand the power of positive measures to change behavior rather than everybody saying, what ugly thing can we do to children in order to get them to stop misbehaving? Because here's the sad truth, you all. Some of our kids who really misbehave, the things that have been done to them by the people who profess to love them are way worse than anything that we could do. So we have to be careful that we don't put all of our eggs in the punishment basket. Finally, the last one is we have to take an instructional approach to behavior. It's easy to believe that everybody's kid was raised by your mom, isn't it? We like to believe that everybody has had the same background, the same. Anybody know the phrase home training, or do we just use that in Kentucky? Do y'all know home training? It's not. It's easy for us to believe that everybody's had the home training you have, but that doesn't happen. We've got some kids that the way they behave at home, we don't appreciate at school. And the only way they're going to learn that is if we teach them and expand that behavioral repertoire so that they have a shot in life of understanding how to be successful in more than one place. So we take a very instructional approach to behavior. We want to teach kids this is what it takes in order to be successful in our school. Our goal is that no student comes to school and doesn't understand what it takes to be successful in that building. So our approach, those three big tenets of our version of PBIS is that we're proactive, we're positive, and we're instructional. What questions or comments do you have about any of those ideas? Y'all are quiet. I can see thought bubbles over your head.
Susan, something I probably should have said when I was introducing you is this aligns directly with the board goals of a safe and nurturing learning environment. From that perspective,
It's
knowing
right in
what
there.
to anticipate when they walk in is very important.
And congratulations on your goals of a safe and nurturing environment. Not every school district is brave enough to say that. So congratulations on doing that. All right. So how do we do this? So now I want to get into the nitty gritty of how all this works, because all that sounds real lofty, doesn't it? But we got to figure out how the mechanics of all this actually work. So the goal, and there are two big goals of this, and the first one is through this work, we want to never lose sight that our main focus is student achievement. That's our main focus, and that's probably what you all are looking at. But in order to really facilitate student achievement, we have to reduce any barriers that we can to student learning. And so those are the two big goals of positive behavior support. Now, there are three levels that we have to look at. I've talked about two of them already today. We're going to look school-wide. This is what we do holistically in the building for everybody. Then we want classroom teachers to apply these same principles to managing their classroom, but we always know that there are going to be individuals who need, extra scoops of support along the way. And part of the work of Safe and Civil Schools is we also provide information to teachers, school psychologists, special education teachers, et cetera, on how we can really establish individualized behavior intervention plans for youngsters who may need those additional scoops of support. And every district that I work with now has a growing number of youngsters who need more and more support behaviorally. And I think you all probably hear that just in your neighborhood, and you're not unique in that regard. That happens in every school district that we're working with across the country. I think the pandemic had a fair amount to do with increasing students' mental health needs and behavioral needs. When kids were home for a couple of years and not with groups and not under the direct supervision of a teacher or direct supervision of adults all the time, sort of left to their own devices. So this is our model. And this is a model of a multi-tiered system of support. So if you haven't seen, have they seen this before? Have you all seen this before? No? Okay. So this is what we do in foundations, but it really captures all three of our tiers. So the very first thing we ask schools to do is to form a team. And Trenae mentioned it's a representative team made up of the administrator, teachers, general education teachers, a special education teacher. We also like representation from your classified staff. So I think we've got a custodian on one. We've got a school secretary on one. We've got a couple of proctors who join us because they bring a different perspective about the entire school. And that team, usually made up of 8 to 10, maybe we've got a couple schools with 11 members. They really lead this process in the building. They're responsible for collecting data about the school because we make decisions about what we need to do at the school level to modify or change or protect based on the data that we collect. And we collect data from a variety of sources. So the first source of data that we rely on is we look at incident reports. Sometimes people call these office disciplinary referrals. So we really are looking at the nature and the frequency of misbehavior going on in the building because that gives us information about what we need to work on. We disaggregate those data by grade level, by gender, by ethnicity, by location, by time of day, day of week, month of year, and that allows us to then get ahead of that. For instance, y'all want to guess that day of the week with the highest number of office referrals? Anybody want to guess? Who said Thursday? Thursday's right. Here's why. Monday, we'll go back and reteach. We'll remind kids. Tuesday, I still got a lot of energy as their teacher. I'll still remind them. Wednesday, I'm growing weary of it, but I'll put up with it another day. But if I don't do it on Thursday, do you know what I say by Friday? Fine then. Act like that. I don't care. I'm getting out of here in a couple of minutes. So Thursday is a high day for office referrals. You want to guess the 2 months that are the highest for behavior problems? October's 1. You're close, sir. It's February. October and February, because about in October, the honeymoon's still just ending, and now kids are like, dang, we're back in school again. And then February is such a probably kind of as it gloomy here in February, it is in most places. And so I think it's just gloomy. It's just gloomy anyway. So we ask teams to analyze data because if we know that October is a pretty big month for behavior problems, guess what we can do? We can prevent them. we can get ahead of them. We can go back, we can address it and say, we know this is going to happen. And so what can we do to prevent that from happening? Can we have a campaign? Can we go back and reteach our expectations? Can we have some contests, a little competition at which classroom has the fewest office rooms? We can do lots of things when we know the patterns of behavior problems. Just like Disneyland knows exactly where the behavior problems happen in their parks, and they work then to prevent that. Sounds like Mr. Bender knows. He'd been there a little bit. Yes, ma'am.
What data collection do we use to break that down?
You all are using your school management system, which aren't you Power School?
Aries.
Aries, sorry, wrong district,
And
sorry.
that'll break it down by where and everything, all the way down to the.
It does have a location.
Okay.
Yeah.
It also depends on how all that's entered into Aries. So we do want to get comfortable with having the time of day put in there, the location put in there, the reporting adult, the adult who reported it, et cetera. But yeah,
And Susan, let me add to that.
Okay.
And it depends on the particular area of focus. So for example, in the cafeteria example, they actually did some data gathering with stopwatches and a spreadsheet because they were just timing how long it took a kid, because they already had some anecdotal data about incidents happening deep in the line because the line was taking so long. So part of their analysis as a team was, let's just go find out how long is it taking? What seems to be? So they mostly did a bunch of observational data on a shared spreadsheet. So they sometimes build a tool useful for the incident they're trying to measure.
Yeah. And that leads me to one of the second forms of data collection we have, and that's observational data. As a matter of fact, this week, I've just given that as a homework assignment for all the teams to go in and conduct some observations before I'm here in November. So we'll have some data in November on those observations of their common areas. We'll get into that in just a second. And then other data sources that we need to be looking at: attendance, tardiness in our secondary campuses. We need to look at the number of special ed referrals in our elementary schools to know if our interventions that we're using are robust enough to prevent youngsters from being identified. We also need to know the number of students who qualify once we've referred them to special education, so that we have that number. It's reasonably high, that we're making good recommendations for testing. So we've got a whole series of data collection strategies that schools can use. And then we rely on something called the improvement cycle. And again, this is unique to foundations. It's not in traditional PBIS, and this is the team's work. They start with a review of data. They share those data with the entire staff. The staff then helps them select, this is where we want you to spend your time. So it does involve the entire staff. And then one of the biggest challenges, and I'll probably show you this, I'm probably ahead of myself in my PowerPoint, is we get it in writing. Because so much of what goes on in school relative to our procedures is oral history. Somebody just tells somebody, this is what we do here. But it's really hard to have adult consistency when it's not written down. And it's really hard for our administrators to hold staff accountable when we don't have a written document that says this is the way our cafeteria works. From that, we start looking at our common areas. I'm going to go deeper in all of this in just a second. But we look at common areas. And those are the areas in which all kids are at some point. And they're supervised either by rotating supervisors or multiple supervisors, or in many cases, they're classified employees. And so we want to structure those because the behavior in those common areas has a major impact on what goes on in the classroom. If the cafeteria is chaotic, if the playground is chaotic, teachers have to eat up precious instructional time getting kids back under instructional control when things are crazy. So we want to make sure that all of those areas are highly structured and highly predictable with lots of good routines and procedures so that teachers have maximum amount of time when they're in the classroom. Probably the trickiest one on that second level is our school policies. That's really where we see the most inconsistency across the country. And that is and it's probably the bane of your all's existence. You probably hear more about policies than anything else. And now I'm talking about hats and hoods, cell phones, food and drink in the classroom, dress code, any of those things that are kind of hot button issues, we ask schools to really tackle those, particularly our secondary schools. And let's decide of those, what based on your all's decisions as a school board, then what's that going to look like? How are we going to implement that in our schools so that we get as much consistency as we can? It's really hard to get as much consistency. I'm not going to lie to you. It's still tough because you have people who they don't agree with it. And so you've got some teachers, particularly our secondary schools, not you, and I'm saying there are teachers out there, not necessarily in Apple Valley, who say, you know what, I think the dress code's stupid, so I'm not going to enforce it. So we really try to impress upon our staff, it doesn't matter what you think. If this is the decision that 90% of the staff says is good for our kids, you've got to do your level best to implement it. But I'm not going to lie to you, it still is an issue. From that, if you look on just going up a little bit, we're still at tier 1. So when you talk about tiers, tier 1 means this is for everybody. Doesn't matter who you are. Everybody gets this. Everybody participates in this. We look at how we can respond to misbehavior more efficiently and more effectively and more consistently, because that's the other reason that we see an increase in misbehavior is the adult inconsistency on a campus. And so we really delve into how can we all agree these are the behaviors that we're going to manage in the classroom. The principal's going to say these are the behaviors that I need to see in the office. And there's some squishy ones in between that we'll get there. And then we really work constantly on creating that invitational school climate, because we know that kids they fare better in education when their school is calm, when it's nurturing, when they feel both emotionally and physically safe. And so there's a constant talk in our work in foundations about creating that invitational school climate. And then I'm so impressed with a couple of your schools, because I'm sure that you all as board members hear from people about bullying. Do you not? Is that still a kind of a big issue? And really, my experience tells me that, yes, we still have bullying going on, but we also have kids who don't know how to problem solve, period. And so when you don't know how to solve a problem, you call it bullying, and so do your parents. And you've got a couple of schools that we're working with who have really delved into our problem-solving strategy called Stop, Think, Plan. They're teaching kids that problem-solving strategy and also having parent meetings to teach the parents that strategy. So I'm so impressed that they decided to take that on, because it's a little tricky. Continue with tier 1. That's where we're going to get into classroom, and I'm going to kind of save that because I do want to get you into that Champs book. I hesitated about doing this, but I feel like I need to this next section, and that is, it's one of the reasons that I lie to people on airplanes when I'm on an airplane. I just flat out lie to them. Because if, you know, you're sitting on an airplane and I'm on probably 5 a week, and the first thing they say is, what do you do? Right? So if I'm feeling frisky, I tell them what I do, and that we try to help schools with behavior. The reason I lie is because you know that everybody thinks they have the answer to that because they went to school. They offer some very, very simple solutions, and all of them are wrong, because most of those people haven't been in a school since they were in school, and they think that solution that worked for them is going to work for somebody else, and it just doesn't. So I lie and tell people I do something else.
That issues in dealing with behavior issues in the 70s or the 80s or even further back don't work today.
Yeah. Well, first of all,
everybody has that opinion, like, well, when I went to school, they did this.
Yeah.
They used to beat us with a stick or, ruler or,
yeah,
you know.
exactly.
So why wouldn't those issues, well, I know why they won't, because we can't, but why don't they work, or why won't they work?
I'm going to be real honest with
Yeah.
you. They worked for some kids. But if you'll think about the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, we were largely still exclusive. meaning as long as you did what you were supposed to do, you were welcome at school. But if you didn't, we sent you packing.
Huh? That's true.
You don't think that's true?
No, I do think
It's
that's
true.
There wasn't disruptions.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yep. We just sent you out. And after we had No Child Left Behind, we no longer have that ability to just send you out. Plus, if you think about that as a community issue, if we send kids out uneducated, just go, as a community, we're no better off. And so it really is, in my opinion, as an educator, it's incumbent upon me to actually try to fulfill the promise that we have that everybody can be educated. I think that's a promise that we've made as Americans that we've yet to fulfill.
Is that possible?
I hope so. I wouldn't be standing here if I didn't think it was. I wouldn't be standing here at this old age still doing this work if I didn't think it was
Because
possible.
some of that is a detriment to the kids that really want to learn.
Yeah.
And they're pushed into these situations where kids are in there and we can't remove them, but yet the ones that really want to learn
Yeah.
are hampered by the behavior problems.
Yeah, and I'm not going to lie, it happens partially from some mandates through IDEA, which is the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, meaning it's very hard to remove a youngster. I am an advocate for a full continuum of services. I hope a full continuum of services, meaning that we have to find the services that are going to support those kids where they are, as opposed to trying to force all kids into a general education setting. I've been a special educator for almost my entire career. I did teach high school English for 2 years, which was a lot of fun. But I've seen that continuum go from everybody was segregated in a special education class, if you had that label, to now the pendulum swung, and now we've got everybody, if they can, in a general education class. And I don't think either one of those extremes are benefiting everybody. I think we're going to have to find some common ground. I do know that most districts like yours are providing an enormous amount of supports for those youngsters who are the most difficult to teach. We've got mental health specialists now in schools. We've got a BCBA, which is a certified behavior analyst, helping develop behavior intervention plans for those youngsters. It's not perfect. It'll never be perfect because we're dealing with humans. But I do think people are trying their very best to get those kids what they need and then not have those kids not disrupt the learning of all. The bad thing is you all probably don't hear the success stories of kids who are integrated into general ed classes and are doing well. What you all hear about are the outliers, the real exceptions, that this is a really tough kid to teach. Nobody's going to come and say, my kid is in special education, they're in general ed, and they're doing great, and I wanted you to know that. Nobody does that because we don't think about that when that happens. We tend to hear the horror stories, and they're out there, and they're everywhere. And I'll be honest with you, nobody has the absolute answer right now. I know that didn't satisfy you, but
No.
it
was a question.
well, it's a question. So here are some things, like, for instance, throughout my lifetime, there's been an overdependence on punishment. As a matter of fact, after Columbine, the Congress enacted what was called zero tolerance. Are you all familiar with that term? And that was for two real discrete behaviors. I think California Ed Code, there are 5. Pat showed me yesterday, but that was 2 that Congress enacted: weapons and drugs. Since that time, suspension has doubled or tripled for almost everything, yet 5 or less % of those are for weapons or drugs. So we've used suspension for everything. And that's why you, as a school board, are probably under a mandate from the state to reduce suspension, or at least look at suspension data. Are you all not supposed to look at that? So it's one of those things that we have to get a handle on. So this overdependence on punishment is the thing that kept us sort of mired in that exclusive kind of idea of education, when it's really, again, I still believe in that promise of education for all. The second is we have people who just get emotional. They want to scream and yell and belittle and embarrass and humiliate and all that kind of stuff. And what we know now is that that's not good for children's mental health, nor is it good for the adult who find themselves in that position. So that increase in emotional intensity has been one of those things that we've relied on to manage behavior. The third is that the role of the principal has probably changed more in the last 50 years than any role in school. When I was in school, Warden Thomas was my elementary school principal. He was also my Sunday school teacher at the Vine Grove Baptist Church when I was there. Nice man. He'd been the ag teacher at the high school. And they thought, well, he's going to be a fine elementary principal. And he was, because at that time, what were his jobs? What was the job of the principal back when I went to school about the time the earth cooled? What did he do? Maybe. He made sure the buses got there on time. He made sure payroll was met. He made sure we had textbooks. He made sure substitutes were called. But if my teacher had said, I'm having trouble with this little reading group, can you help me with instruction? What do you think Warden would have said? I don't know anything about reading instruction for little kids. I'm an ag teacher. See, our principals are now instructional leaders. Every one of the principals that you all have hired have the ability to go in and help teachers deliver high quality instruction. That's why you hire those folks. So this idea that we can just send all the kids to the office and they're going to be handled, our principals shouldn't even be in their office very much anymore. They're probably in classrooms helping teachers, coaching teachers to deliver the highest quality instruction they can. And then finally, I don't ever want to discount this, but wishing and hoping is always one of those things that's been a kind of an idea that we've had that we rely on. These things, we still have some of them in some level, but certainly we don't rely on any one of them to manage behavior anymore. It's really everybody's job in the 21st century to manage behavior, not just one person's. So that's kind of where we were. And what we're looking at now is we're looking at all aspects of behavior, not just the punishment side. And I think that's what we relied on to think about behavior, but we have to take a far more comprehensive approach. So if you look at those bullets, it's really about the climate of the school that serves to prevent some misbehavior. We want to make sure our schools are both physically and emotionally safe, because if our schools are not physically and emotionally safe, children will not take the risk to learn. If I'm scared, either for my physical safety or if somebody is berating or humiliating me, a teacher, I'm not going to let myself become vulnerable in front of that person to let them know what I don't know. And so we've got to make sure that our schools are both physically and emotionally safe. This does involve discipline, although the definition of discipline, if you look it up in Webster's, says to teach. And that's a tenet of PBIS foundations, is that we're going to teach youngsters how to behave in school. We're going to make sure that they're taught. I'll share that with you in just a second. And then, of course, we've got to have some plans for youngsters who need additional support, and we want to make sure that students feel highly connected to school. There is huge research done by the Centers for Disease Control, looked at about 700,000 kids. They're mostly 7th through 12th grade. And they looked at the difference between kids who had a strong connection to an adult in a building and those who did not. And they anticipated the differences would be academic, that the kids who were connected, they predicted they're going to graduate at higher levels, they're going to make better grades, they're going to go on to post-secondary activities that are going to, serve them well. What they didn't anticipate when they looked at those connections that kids would make were the health benefits. They found that kids who were connected to school, this startled me when I read this study, they wore seat belts at higher levels than kids who did not have a school connection. They used alcohol, tobacco, and drugs either not at all, or they delayed the onset of the use of those things until they were almost adults. There were less suicidal ideation. There were fewer mental health issues. They turned less to gangs and violence. The health benefits of being connected to school are enormous. And so part of this work is we really try to impress on the adults in the building. We've got to make strong connections with kids. It really is all about relationships between the adults in the building and kiddos. So that's kind of the big picture now of what we're doing. Yes, ma'am.
I do have a question, based on what you have put out there as your foundation. Just curious about why student connectedness was put last. And yet, if you could put them first and you made the connection with the student, it will be an easier way to handle.
To do all of those?
To do the other ones.
Yeah, it would.
But to have, yes, you're gonna have a climate, but the climate has to do with the emotional well-being of all the players
Yeah.
in the classroom or on campus. And once you can get in control of the emotional well-being of all the players and begin to work on student connectedness, then behavior support plans will come in place and you'll have less discipline.
Yeah.
So I'm just wondering why you put it last instead of putting it towards the top.
There wasn't really a rhyme or reason to where I put those bullets. I apologize, but you're right. And probably as I change this, I'll go ahead and put student connectedness at the top of that list, because what you just said makes perfect sense, because everything flows from that.
And I'll just mention also that is part of what we gather, another piece of data we gather through that Youth Truth Survey, kind of a couple of really good questions of asking students exactly what you kind of highlighted. This idea is there, is there an adult at school that you can turn to if you have a need? And, or do you feel a part of your school community? It's really helpful and revealing data kind of by grade level. And it does track nicely with kind of what we're seeing also in school climate.
Yeah,
So
it does.
principals have that data, and it's neat to see where it starts to rise. It's correspondent with places where we see, just kind of general climate improvement.
Any other comments? Real quickly, I want to share with you, we have a set of beliefs that these are kind of what we believe as the authors of foundations. I'm one of the authors of foundations, but all of us at Safe and Civil School, these are our beliefs. And the first is this, that the staff creates the climate of the school. As a matter of fact, the founder of Safe and Civil School says always that the climate and culture of your school is defined by the daily actions of the staff, not the kids. So we define what the culture of the climate looks like, and it needs to be warm, it needs to be welcoming, invitational, and that we're constantly monitoring that climate. The second is that we believe that if we want kids to be successful, we have to teach them how to be successful at school. That not every single kid is blessed with the kind of family that allows them to know everything that they need in order to be successful. And when we can't guarantee that, we have to do that on our own. So the behaviors necessary for success, we're going to ask our staff to teach those. We believe that every single youngster should have access to excellent instruction. And that's why this really, removing these barriers, again, we're not discounting instruction. As a matter of fact, we're trying to open up opportunities for better and higher quality instruction by removing those barriers to learning. We also believe that every expectation should be clarified and that the adults and the campus should be as consistent as they can in enforcing all of the school-wide expectations and rules. That's a challenge. When you get 100 plus adults in a building, to try to get everybody on the same page is a little bit like trying to herd cats. But we know that with consistent work and consistent information, we can get there. We also believe, and so I never want anybody to think that we don't believe in any kind of punishment. And that's really a misconception about PBIS in general. A lot of people say to me, oh, we don't want to do PBIS because you can't correct kids. That's a lie. As a matter of fact, we probably need to correct more at earlier stages so that we don't get those big kind of misbehaviors. So we have to have corrective procedures, but we also understand that they have limitations. And so we really want to view misbehavior as an opportunity for us to teach youngsters how to behave better, right? That's probably our biggest challenge. And then we want to make sure, and this is true from every time we're here, we talk about this, and that everybody in a school should be treated with the inherent dignity that they deserve because they're a human, and with the utmost respect. So that's true of how our administrators deal with our staff members and students, and that's also true of how our staff members should be managing students with the utmost respect. Even when we have to correct them, we have to do that respectfully. This is the last slide, and then we Pat, probably should take a break. I love this quote. It says, effective school-wide and classroom management plans prevent misbehavior, and they should be continually refined to help students become increasingly respectful, responsible, motivated, and highly engaged in meaningful tasks. That's really our mission right there. There are two words in that paragraph, though, that I think are that are absolutely important. Here's the first one. The first one is prevention. We just talked about that. If we spend all of our time talking about what ugly things we can do to children after they've misbehaved, we've missed the whole boat. We need to be thinking like Disneyland. We need to be thinking about how we can prevent misbehavior. And the second one is the first word in the fourth line, become. It'd be nice if all of our kids arrived at Apple Valley respectful, responsible, and highly motivated, but they're not. And we have to understand that learning is a process. All behavior is learned. Academic behavior is learned, social behavior is learned. It's not all learned at the same rate and at the same time. So we have to, as the adults in the school, be patient and be persistent that we're continuing to teach kids how to be respectful, responsible, and motivated. That's part of our job in educating the citizens of Apple Valley, is to teach them those three things. Questions? How long we want to break?
5 minutes.
An hour? I got to go to bed. I'm on Eastern Daylight Time.
How about start with 5, and if it takes a little bit longer.
All right.
to get us through those,
Can I set the timer for 5 minutes then?
that'd be
All right,
great.
I will set it for
If we
5
need a
minutes.
little more, we'll-
All right, we'll do it. So please get up, get some water, move around, do all that stuff.
snacks and
Be back in 5 minutes. Oh, there's. Appreciate you all headed back. What the easiest way I can teach you about what we do is to show you what we call the STOIC framework. Again, we're the alphabet people. We love acronyms. And so years ago, the founder of Safe and Civil Schools came to us and he said, I've looked at all of the components of PBIS, and if you're not careful, you can kind of get lost in the weeds. And he said, I've looked at every part of PBIS. He's one of the original authors, by the way. All of PBIS started back in the 80s at the University of Oregon. He was a professor there at the time, and so he is one of the original drafters of the concepts of PBS, which now is PBIS. So he came to us and he said, I came up with this acronym called STOIC because I think I can fit almost everything under one of these 5 variables. So real quickly, and I'm going to go through each one of them individually. The first one is that we structure all parts of the learning environment for success. Once it's structured, then we teach kids to mastery what that looks like. We need to make sure that we are providing good observation, both through the collection and analysis of data. But the other big piece about this is active supervision. We put a huge emphasis on teaching people how to effectively supervise youngsters. The I in STOIC means that we want to build those positive relationships, and then we know that we will have to correct misbehavior because they're still kids, and invariably they're going to make social errors, and we have to be prepared to correct them. So let me talk about each one of those as they relate to foundations. In foundations, we start by looking at each of the common areas in a school. So the team I mentioned earlier will systematically work through each of these common areas. Again, these are where all kids go, but are supervised either by multiple supervisors or rotating supervisors or classified employees. When we look at the structure, we have to look at these things, and there are several, and I'm sorry, that's a lot of words on a screen, so just look at the big, bold things. For instance, we asked the team to go in and look at the physical arrangements. Is there anything that we can do to the physical setting of this area in the school that could minimize the probability that misbehavior would occur again? Your example of the menu would be that. When I was teaching at the high school and we implemented this, I was actually a charter member of the high school where I taught of a brand new building. Gorgeous building in Lexington, Kentucky. We had a glass stairwell that overlooked a pasture where we had thoroughbreds. And I don't know if you know much about Kentucky, but we are famous for our thoroughbreds. Well, that glass staircase, everybody wanted to be in. It was in the middle of the hallway. And so we had a class change. That stairwell was packed with kids. The first afternoon, the principal called a staff meeting at the end of the first day and said, we've got to make a change in this stairwell or somebody's going to get hurt. So we had to make that stairwell one way, right? It was only down. You could only go down in that middle stair because we had 4 other staircases that kids weren't using. So we asked our teams to go look at the building. Is there anything that looks a little bit crazy? If we're talking about elementary schools, sometimes our playgrounds are so big that we can't effectively supervise them. And so we have to think about, do we cordon off part of our playground if we can't adequately supervise this and kids are way over there and we can't see them? So that we actually look at any of the things that we can change structurally in the building. The second is any kind of scheduling issues that we want to change. For instance, most people don't know that there is little research that supports that there's the optimum time for passing periods at secondary schools. It really depends on the size of your building. It depends on the location of classrooms, et cetera. And so we ask schools to look at that. And we got to look at the Goldilocks rule for that, because you give them too much time and they're late to class. You don't give them enough time and they're late to class. There's a sweet spot that you can get there, but we have the team investigate that. What's the best way to do that? And then as we're thinking about organizational patterns, for instance, until kids have a driver's license, they don't know that the best way to navigate a hallway is for everybody to walk on the right-hand side in the direction of travel. Once they get a driver's license, they're pretty good at that. But look at a bunch of 6th graders trying to get from one class to the other with no driver's license, and it is chaos unless we teach them you need to stay the right-hand side of the hall in the direction of travel. So I know all this sounds crazy, but what we're trying to do is, again, prevent opportunities for misbehavior. That routines and procedures, and again, as I mentioned earlier, that's a real tough spot, trying to get all of those things like dress code, ID badges, hats and hoods, cell phones, all of that is problematic. And the closer we can get to that everybody agrees, the fewer behavior problems we have relative to any of those procedures. Once all that's done, then we want to be real explicit. What is it that we want students to do in order to be successful in each one of those areas that you just looked at on that previous slide? And once that's done, then we want to be real explicit about what adult behavior will look like. And we want to put that in writing. Because as I said earlier, it's really hard to have consistency if we don't have it in writing. If we don't, it's kind of like that. Remember that telephone game you played in school where Matt would whisper something to Dustin and Dustin would whisper to Pat and Pat would whisper to Dennis. And by the time it got all the way down here, it was nothing like what we thought. That can happen if we don't have our procedures in writing. People will say, I didn't know that, or nobody told me that. So we want to make sure that we're real explicit for that. Once that's happened, I'm going to go to the next slide. Once we know all that, then we want to make sure that we teach youngsters what that looks like. I'm going to give you a classic example. I was working at a school in Mount Vernon, Washington, and it is a great place. I'm going in a couple of weeks. So I went to visit the school, and it was right after about a year or so after the pandemic. Maybe not quite a year. And I've not been in one of your elementary cafeterias yet, but in Washington and Oregon, they have salad bars for the kids. Little short salad bars. And the kids go through and get a salad bar. Same thing in Alaska, where I'm going next week. So the principal came in and she was carrying these great big bags. And I said, can I help you? And she said, you can carry this. And so we went into the cafeteria, and she had taken a piece of 1x1 lumber, 1x1. She'd cut it into 1-inch pieces, and she had bags full of it. And then she had a couple of bags of dried pasta. And she said, our TK kids, our kindergarten kids, our first grade kids, and our second grade kids have never used the salad bar. And starting on Monday, they have to use the salad bar. So she filled one of those containers with those wooden blocks and the other 2 containers with dried pasta. She had paper plates. She had tongs like they were going to have to use to get the lettuce out. And she scheduled all of those classes to come in and practice using the salad bar, but without vegetables, so that we didn't have a big mess. And believe it or not, everybody was able to navigate the salad bar just a little bit better because they had rehearsed it. It wasn't foreign to them. So we have to not assume that kids know how to do stuff. We just say, you know what, we're going to teach you how to be successful. So we want really explicit lessons on how to be successful in each of the schools' common area. And that is a hallmark of all PBIS. Let's go to the next. So these are some things that we do in addition to that. So we ask most schools then to have a visual prompt of that. So this is from a restroom in one of the schools that I worked with, because they were having kids have water all over the bathroom floor. And you know what happens when there's water on the bathroom floor, don't you? People slip, right? We're going to have an accident. So they taught kids to turn on the water, get a pump of soap, wash your hands, flick in the sink, and then hold your hands up till you went to get your paper towel. The custodian said, this has made a major difference in keeping the restroom clean. Again, we have to teach kids what we need in order to be successful. This is from a middle school that I worked with in Los Angeles Unified. These are their hallway expectations. One of the things that we ask teachers or ask teams to create are something called one-liners. We want to make it safe enough for everybody to correct every single youngster if they see a social error. And sometimes that doesn't happen. The reason that we hit on that, and I'm sorry, it's a bad example, but I was working with a high school in another state, I won't tell you where, and there was a teacher supervising in a stairwell during passing periods. She saw 2 teenagers, I think they were sophomores, and they were kissing in the stairwell. And it wasn't like a little peck on the mouth and go on to class. It was you remember when you were 15? Anyway, she didn't know them, didn't teach them. And so here's what she said to them. You 2 need to get a room. Well, the mom didn't like that very much, that this teacher had told her kids to go and engage in sexual activity, wasn't very happy. And so it created a big kind of stink at the school. And so we've learned then that we need to have statements that are safe enough that anybody can correct anybody without getting in trouble. So we like those one-liners, and you've got an example of that right now. So they would say things like, stay in your lane, slow your roll, responding to profanity, which is rampant among every school that I work with now, and having teachers have something that they can say to remind kids that we don't use profanity, and then looking at making sure that kids are getting to class on time. So those are just some examples of that. The O in STOIC, again, this is where we're going to both observe and we're going to collect and analyze data. We know that the more that kids know that adult eyes are on them, the fewer behavior problems we experience. It's just like anybody. If you're being watched, you do the right thing. So, and especially if you like that person, you tend to put your best foot forward, because we know if there's not active supervision, kids are going to push the limits. And that's when we see a lot of stuff going on. And what we've learned is that we've got to actually teach adults how to supervise, particularly our classified employees. We hire people who are really great people, but they may not know that there's a real art and science to supervision. And so part of the foundation's material has good information for us to actually teach all employees how to provide good supervision. All right. The I is that we've got to teach everybody how to make sure that the interactions that we have with children are positive. So we teach two different things. One is non-contingent attention, and that's really us just interacting with kids because they're there. So we say good morning. We have teachers at their doors greeting kids after each passing periods at our secondary school so that kids feel welcome into the classroom. And then we also know that positive feedback is one of the integral parts of instruction. So we've got to teach teachers that it's not nice to give positive feedback. It's essential to give positive feedback because it solidifies what they're trying to teach. And so we've got to get people skilled in the art of delivering positive feedback. Good job is not positive feedback. We've got to be specific and descriptive when we tell kids, hey, this is what I saw you do. This is what you've done, because that begins to expand their repertoire. Oh, I did that. I'm getting it. So this is something that we work on both in classroom management, school-wide discipline, or school-wide efforts to increase everybody's skill in the delivery of positive feedback. But it's really important that every single student understand that they're noticed, right? That they're valued, because that's really important. Those are the prevention variables: structuring, teaching, observing, and building positive relationships. That's the way we prevent misbehavior. You can manipulate those variables in any way you choose. But I'll tell you, here's the thing, the worrisome thing is that we're still going to have kids who act up. And why is that? Because they're kids, right? We expect that. They're still in the learning process. I don't know about you, but I still make social errors personally. So I don't know that we ever turn into perfect humans. So we can always anticipate that somebody's going to make a mistake. So we have to learn how to correct misbehavior. I call these the LY words. I think I'm the only one of the trainers who does that. I don't know. I don't know if you all are as old as I am, but did anybody watch a little TV show called Schoolhouse Rock? Lolly, 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 get your adverbs here. Because those are all adverbs. I don't know if you all remember that or not, but those are adverbs. And so we teach people, these aren't the correction procedures we use, but this is the demeanor with which we need to correct other people's children. We have to do it calmly because we want to model good problem solving for our kids. We need to be consistent. We don't need to just pick on those kids that are troublesome to correct. We need to correct everybody when they make a mistake. Even the kids who rarely make one still need a correction. The research says that the closer we can get to that misbehavior to correct it, the better off we are. We don't need to become disruptive to the point that we lose instructional time addressing misbehavior. We want to do it as briefly as possible. And then, as I said earlier, one of our hallmarks is that we do it respectfully. Everything I've talked to you about in terms of the STOIC framework sounds so simple, doesn't it? You'd think, well, that's common sense. Pat's probably seen this, but I don't think the rest of you have. Has anybody read this book, Super Freakonomics? There was a story in it about Cedars-Sinai Hospital down in Los Angeles. And in that story, it reminds us that physicians have known since 1847 that they should wash their hands between patients. Did you all know that? Lord knows what they were doing before 1847. I guess people were dying, right? So sometime in the mid-90s, Cedars-Sinai realized, no, I'm sorry, it was the early aughts. Cedars-Sinai started looking at their data and they realized we've got increased numbers of people with hospital-borne infections. MRSA is one of them. C. diff is another. Necrotizing fasciitis, that flesh-eating one, that's another one. And they wondered, are our physicians doing the simplest thing they know to address these infections? Are they washing their hands? So they asked physicians to self-report. There you go. What letter grade is 74 at Apple Valley? Is that a C? So they got a solid C in hand washing. Well, they were aghast. They said, that can't possibly be right. These are physicians. They're well trained. So they sent teams of observers all over the hospital to observe hand washing at Cedars-Sinai. Oh, Amanda's going, it was a whole lot better than that. Y'all think it was higher or lower? What do you think? 9%. Now, here's my point. My point is, these are highly educated, been to school for 12, 15, 18 years. What I've just described to you in terms of managing student behavior sounds really simple when we put it in the Stoic framework. But here we've got even a group of physicians who forgot some of the most basic tenets of prevention of disease. So it's important that, as simple as these 5 variables sound, it's essential that we remind people of those constantly. I can tell you how they fixed it. They basically implemented the Stoic framework. Here's what the first thing they did, though, is what we always think about. Because when a kid messes up at school, the first thing we think about is doing what? Punishment. So they sent threatening, nasty letters to all those physicians saying, we're going to fire you. What do you think that did? Nothing. Yeah, try to find another cardiothoracic surgeon as good as me. You're not going to fire me. And so those things went basically unheeded. So they brought all the physicians in and shared the data with them about the rise of both insurance costs, lawsuit costs, and patient care costs with these horrible diseases. They then sent all the physicians into the lab where they had prepared Petri dishes, and they asked each physician to put their hand in that Petri dish. Those were cultured, photographed, and each one sent to each physician's computer as their screensaver. So they came in every morning, turned on their computer. What'd they see? Somebody's nasty germs. Now, not textbook nasty germs, but their own nasty germs. And they got hand washing to 100%. Now, I want you to understand what they did. They had to change behavior. And they did it not through punitive measures, but through manipulating the variables, the very variables that we're trying to manipulate in your schools of structure, teach, observe, interact positively. I don't know that they did any positive interaction. So the challenge is, it's really more about changing adult behavior than it is kid behavior. And that's really our challenge, because changing adults' behavior is difficult, right? We think about changing kids' behavior, but changing adult behavior is somewhat more difficult. It's one of the reasons that our approach to professional development in this regard is sustained over time. So for instance, when I start working with your schools and foundations, we're here over 3 years. We meet with those teams multiple times, usually 3 or 4 times a year over 3 years. All the professional development research supports that sustained training over time is what produces a lasting result. So your all's willingness to participate in a long-term view of this, because it's not a quick fix. It's not a quick fix anywhere. So we know that we're doing the right thing. Questions so far? Comments? Yeah.
I just want to ask, Susan, we did things a little backward in Apple Valley because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
We had plans to bring foundations in, and then we closed.
Yeah.
And so we moved forward with champs first.
Right.
Will we be successful doing that?
You know what?
That's a hard question.
I've done it both ways.
Okay.
I've sometimes it just depends on what people want first. I don't know that there's a right or wrong way to do it. Sometimes we do it simultaneously. I've done it so many ideations. We've started at various times in the year. I think you're going to be successful. I really do. I'm already seeing change just this first year. Day before yesterday. Well, you were there. It might be easier for you to tell that anecdote than me, but we did have
Which one?
the substitute.
Absolutely.
Do you mind if she shares an anecdote from two of our schools that happened just this week?
So at the beginning of Susan's trainings, she always has them reflect on the work they've done and report out. And one of the teams reported out and was sharing their one-liners and their school-wide process that they have put in place. And another teacher on another campus said, I need to compliment you. Somebody that is marrying into my family has subbed at your school. They subbed at your school last year, and they subbed at your school this year. And just a few weeks into school, they already see a marked difference of what's going on the campus, and they asked what had changed. Did I know what had changed? And she responded, I bet it's their foundations. So for another school site teacher to speak up and talk about the success that she was hearing outside of actually experiencing it, but through somebody else's eyes that she had as a trusted confidant. So,
yeah, it was amazing. Just some kind of pragmatic stuff. This is what I think Amanda's already looked this up online. This is the material that we use. I think that's another hallmark of why I think our PBIS model is superior, is because we really do provide material that teams can use long after I'm gone. It's never our goal to work at a school district the rest of our lives. We really want folks to be able to self-sustain this work, but they always have the material that they need in order to do this. So there are 6 modules that work through each of the Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 support for behavior, as well as each school has access to video by all of the 4 of the authors, and then lots of resources. I'm excited because we're in the process of revising this. Jessica Sprick and I are working on the revision. And one of the things that we do that we love is we collect samples from all across the country to go in as exemplars. And we've already got a couple of schools in Apple Valley that we're going to get their exemplars, and they'll be highlighted in the newest edition of Foundations when it comes out, probably in 2026. So we're excited. We're excited about that. I want to go ahead now, because I think I don't want to keep you here all night, but I would like to go ahead and talk about champs. But as we do that, let's just finish with just a word about PBIS. My slide just talks about that it's unlike traditional behavior management, which really views the individual as the problem. PBIS really looks at systems. And let's see if we can modify, or change, or implement systems that are going to eliminate the challenging behavior. Again, more of a Disneyland approach, as you will. So I think that's important to remember. And then MTSS, again, that multi-tiered system of support, which you are obligated to do by law, according to Every Child Succeeds Act. You have to demonstrate that. We're changing the system to meet the needs of youngsters. And I think that's going to be, that's been a real change in the way we viewed behavior than traditional kinds of systems. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit about CHAMPS. Would you all like to talk a little bit about classroom management now? Because is it 5 and I'm here till what time? 6:30. All right, we're probably going to get done before that. 6? We're probably going to get done before that. Would that hurt anybody's feelings if we got done before that? All right, well, because, I put probably 100 slides in here, and you all don't need 100 slides. So let's go ahead and talk about classroom management. Yes.
The change that this has caused for me as the superintendent when
Sure.
I engage with a principal or co-administrator on a campus, when there's something that doesn't seem to be working, having to do with student behaviors or playground or name it, all the different things. The first thing I ask them is, what's the system?
Yeah.
And they often are able to describe it. And I'll say, where is that in writing? And sometimes it is, and sometimes it isn't. And so when it isn't, I always ask that they put it in writing
Yeah.
because how are they able to share that, teach it,
Right?
and the expectations, all of it. So that has changed my work when I'm out working with principals. And it has, for me, it feels a much more supported system than one that is constantly trying to refine for them or come up with a
Right.
solution for them.
Yeah.
It's more, what's the system? Where is it written? Show it to me.
Yeah.
How have you taught it? We stoic the heck out of it.
Right, good.
And so I am very appreciative of that from this role.
The thing that really makes that work is all the research that we know about what teachers need in order to have job satisfaction, and that one is that they have a voice in curricular decisions, and 2, they have a voice in behavioral decisions. And so when you put that back on the staff to say, what is your procedure? Again, the more they are involved in that decision making, as opposed to somebody saying, oh, well, the superintendent said we have to do this, or the principal said we have to do this, people are happier when they've had a voice in how their school's managed. Now, I do always remind the teams, and I had to remind them again yesterday or Monday, that this is never designed to usurp the power of the principal, ever. It's not designed to do that, because what we talked with principals, or when I'm talking to leaders, I say, really, there are 3 kinds of decisions that you have to make. Some are just, you have to make a unilateral decision. The superintendent calls and says, I need an answer in 2 hours, and you don't have time to ask anybody, nor does she want you to ask anybody. She just wants you to make a decision. Second way that I make decisions is that there are some things that I'm going to elicit information from the staff, but ultimately that principal has to make that decision. And third, we really need to think about what are the decisions that our staff should make in order to be engaged in the process. I don't ever like to use that word buy-in, because I don't think we need to get people to buy in. We need to get people engaged. And so the more I can help, the more I can be a part of the decision-making process, the more likely I am to be engaged in the process. So I think that's, again, changed a lot of people's work. If you look back, I'm back at our little pyramid. And if you look in the middle, you see positive classroom management. And the text that we use, one you have in front of you, and that's the CHAMPS book. And then the other one is on my slide, and that's its companion piece. That's Discipline in the Secondary Classroom. Again, those are almost identical. The reason, to be quite frank with you, that we don't just have one book is that high school people do not think that anything that happens in elementary school is relative to them. And I can say that from an old high school teacher. That's just what we believe. That anything that elementary school students do, we don't need to do. We have, because we're so different. And so we just create another text. It's like I said, it's almost identical, but it's there. Let me let you go ahead, and in that text, go ahead and open it to the table of contents. You'll find the table of contents, and I don't know what page it's on. So if somebody will find the page number for the table of contents, I should have put it in here. I apologize. What is it? Roman numeral 5. All right. If you'll look at that, there are 11 chapters in this text, and each of those chapters has 3 to probably 10 discrete tasks. When I mentioned that this text is a compendium of the effective schools research, each one of those tasks are what we know effective teachers do in the classroom. Now, I'll be honest with you, I taught school for a real long time, and there are probably 40 plus of those discrete teacher behaviors contained in that text, or each of those texts. I probably didn't do all 40 of those at once, but I probably did a good number of them every single day. And so this is truly a resource for your teachers to help them make decisions about what they want their classroom management to look like. Now, I'm going to tell you, if I've got to rule the world, which I don't, I probably would not call this classroom management anymore. Because when we use that term, classroom management, most people think that happens the first week of school. What we hope that teachers will understand from this text and from the training is that it's really not classroom management, it's instructional management. And that's what I prefer to call it, is just this is the way we manage instruction. I don't know how many of you all have been in classes recently. Do you all as board members get in classes? You do? So is anybody shocked that instruction has changed significantly? Has anybody watched elementary math instruction in the last 2 years? Yeah, I don't get it. Don't get it. Don't ask me how to. I don't know what you're teaching those kindergarten kids, but it's different than what I learned. What I do know is that now our teachers are using a far wider variety of instructional methodology than any of my teachers did. And the challenge then is, how do I go seamlessly from one kind of instructional strategy to the next instructional strategy to create that kind of variety that 21st century learners demand? They're not going to sit in a bunch of rows anymore and listen to the teacher for 45 minutes and then do independent seat work for another 20 minutes. We just don't have learners who behave that way anymore. Our kids simply don't learn that way. So we know that our teachers need a wide variety of instructional strategies, and they also need to know how to execute those instructional strategies. So this text allows teachers to make decisions about how to navigate those in whatever grade level they need to. It's set up, if you look on the Stoic framework. So if you look at starting at chapter 2, I think it's chapter 2. Don't hold me to that. Does the heading on chapter 2 say structuring for success? Or is it, thank you very much. I appreciate that. This is a fairly new text. I trained the old one for 20 plus years. And so I'm still kind of caught up in those chapters. And so this is a little new for me. I know it well, but not chapter and verse like I did the other one. So chapters 2, 3, and I think chapter 4 are all about how do we structure, what are the decisions we make about the routines and procedures that I put in my classroom. I was sharing with your kindergarten teacher who's sitting here. I was working in Alaska. I work in rural Alaska, up above the Arctic Circle, over on the Northwest coast with the Northwest Arctic Borough School District. So I was in a village school last week of 54 students, pre-K through 12. 54 students, pre-K through 12. And they have a really hard time recruiting teachers to go up to that part of the world to teach. And so they found a new resource for teachers, and they're hiring teachers from the Philippines. Those folks can make more in 1 month than they make a year in the Philippines. So they're anxious to come. But they don't have the same procedures that we have in schools. And so I was in the pre-K class with a brand new teacher from the Philippines. And even something as simple as getting children to line up, so all she said was, boys and girls, line up. Well, it looked like a mad rush to line up at the door. We would never do that. We're going to have a routine I'm sure you've got a routine that she says, if you're wearing red shoes, you may get in line on your spot on the carpet. Oh, if you're wearing blue jeans, you can, or something to that effect, right? We know how to organize. And this woman had no idea how to do that. That text that you're looking at is full of those kinds of ideas that help teachers think about the routines and procedures that they put in their class as we look at structure. When we get to the T in Stoic, And I think that starts in chapter 4. So if you want to look at that heading, is it chapter 4? Somebody help me out here. Chapter 4. That's when our teachers need to then communicate their decisions that they made about how the classroom is going to be structured and organized to their kids. It also, in those chapters, what Jess and the other authors, Jessica Sprick and the other authors put in this text is what are best practices in each of the instructional strategies that we use most frequently. So what I'm doing with you right now is something that we call teacher-directed instruction. Sometimes we used to call it lecture, right? But we don't call it that anymore. Teacher-directed instruction, what's best practice in that? There's a ton of research that says this is what good teachers do when they're delivering that kind of instruction. It also looks at when kids are working independently, how do we maximize that? Use of technology. How do we maximize and how does technology become a partner with instruction, but not become the instruction? Because we can't just advocate instruction to that computer that we're providing kids. That's still not good instruction if we just say, open your Google Classroom and start on your assignment. We've got to provide a human to provide that kind of instruction, as well as using our technology to enhance instruction. So throughout those chapters, we look at what are best practices, what are the best teachers in the world doing in order to enhance every kind of instruction that they're using in the classroom. Once they've done that, we ask them why it's called CHAMPS. And again, CHAMPS is an acronym. Again, we're the alphabet people. And so CHAMPS stands for Conversation, Help, Activity, Movement, Participation, and Success. And so we ask teachers to start thinking about what they want student behavior to look and sound like in each one of those activity structures. So if I take teacher-directed instruction, I'm thinking, okay, I'm going to be in front of the class and I'm going to be teaching and they're going to be listening to me and perhaps taking notes if they're in the 5th, 4th, 5th, 6th grade, whatever. Can they talk to each other while I'm talking? Absolutely not. If they need help, where they're going to get it? Well, they're probably going to need to raise their hand, but I need to teach them that. The activity is that we're going to be engaged in teacher-directed instruction. You're going to be taking notes. Can you ask to use a hall pass during this time? Can you get up to get material? Can you get a tissue? Can you go talk to somebody across the room? I need to be explicit about all that. A lot of our schools, our secondary schools, by the way, implement something called a 10 by 10 or a 5 by 5, depending on their schedule, which means that no hall passes, except for emergencies, are issued during the first 10 minutes of class nor the last 10 minutes of class. The benefit of that is the first 10 minutes of class is usually when the teacher is providing the most robust instruction. And we don't want kids just, can I go, can I go, can I go? And then we need to close instruction. Plus, it also helps us with tardies at secondary schools if we've got our hallways clear of kids the last 10 minutes of class. So I need to talk about movement. And then I need to tell them, this is what participation is going to look like during this activity. And I may need to say, this is what it does not look like. And then if we do, all of this will be successful. In addition to that, when you're in classrooms, it's very likely that you're going to see a visual prompt of CHAMPS up in classrooms. We've done a ton of research, and we know that a strong visual prompt helps kids stay on track because it cuts down on the amount of corrections that teachers have to, verbal corrections that teachers have to do. If kids get off task, I don't have to say, excuse me, remember you're not supposed to be talking right now. I can just go right over to my visual prompt and point to whatever it is, and I don't have to say a word. I don't have to embarrass, humiliate, make that kid feel like they're not, because we all get off track. Everybody gets off task occasionally, and we have to be corrected. So you'll walk in classes, and you're very likely to see some visual prompts, whether it's a poster, whether it's it's embedded in a PowerPoint at one of the secondary schools. I think Trinae was at a school today where they're using those little touch lights that the teacher touches the little light to say, this is who you can talk to, this is how loud you can talk, et cetera, et cetera. Our research, and we've got over 30 years of research on CHAMPS. I will tell you how old I am again now. I had a galley copy of this text when I was still in the classroom. It was in a 3-ring binder published on a copier. So I have the original, one of the original copies of Champs, and Dr. Sprick just said, would you play around with us and give us some feedback? The first edition didn't suggest that we had a strong visual prompt, but we've learned now that visual prompts really help. I don't know if you all are aware of how prompt dependent we are just as a culture. Go to the airport. There's a little video going 3, 2, 1, right? You can have 3 ounces, right? They've got that little video up and they've got signs all the way telling you what you can and can't do. We are a real prompt dependent culture. And so we know that our kids can, it helps if they rely on, if we have the prompts that they can rely on. So here are some of the decisions that we make in terms of structure. I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. We're looking at just the physical setting of the classroom. We've got some examples in your text about what kinds of physical arrangements work. I know we're hearing an awful lot now about sort of some different seating rather than our typical desk. We've got kids sitting on a exercise ball, or we've got kids sitting on a stool where they're a little bit off balance, or we've got kids sitting at tables where they're pedaling a bicycle. And all of that has promising results, but right now we don't have really compelling evidence that it's superior to traditional seating, although we don't have evidence that it's inferior to traditional seating. So jury's still out, basically. But looking at all those routines and procedures, your kindergarten teacher was just telling me she lives and dies by all of those routines and procedures. And she starts on day 1, and day 180, she's still helping those kids understand those routines and procedures. She's getting them ready to be successful students. We do not prescribe that every single teacher does exactly the same thing, because classrooms are unique. Based on the kids that are sitting there and based on the needs of the teacher, and then we have to sort of compromise between what the teacher needs and what the needs of the class are. So in this process, we don't have like all the 3rd grade teachers sit together and come up with a plan that we're going to do in 3rd grade, because you might have one of those 3rd grade classes that needs extremely high structure, lots of predictability, the teacher orchestrating almost everything. And you may have another one where the kids are very responsible, very respectful, and they don't need the teacher to orchestrate all that. As a matter of fact, it would impede their learning if we tried to micromanage them. And so our classrooms are unique, and we want teachers to feel free within a parameter to make the decisions about how their classroom is managed based on what their kids need, not what some other class needs. So that's kind of a bit of a difference. We also know that our teachers, and I'm sorry, I have to preach to high school folks all the time. We don't teach from our bottom anymore. Nobody's going to sit in a big stool. Nobody's going to stand behind a lecture. I'm having a real hard time, to be honest with you, standing behind a lecture, because usually when I'm teaching, I'm all over the place, but I know I need to be on the microphone. So this is killing me. It's why you keep seeing me kind of step out. We've got to have folks circulating around the classroom. They've got to be scanning continuously, particularly when we've put an electronic device in the hand of a teenager. If the teacher is not up circulating and scanning throughout that classroom, and we've got kids with computers out, guess what they're doing? Stuff. They're playing games. They're surfing the internet, whatever they can do that your system allows them to get to. So we've got to impress on folks. We've got to supervise. We've got to supervise our classrooms and our school. We also want to make sure that teachers then are maximizing the I in STOIC. So you've got chapters 7 and 8 in your text, or is it 6 and 7? 7 and 8, I think. 7 and 8 are all about how we build and maintain positive relationships with youngsters. One of the things that we teach that's difficult is that we teach folks to pay more attention when students are behaving responsibly than when they're misbehaving. It's a concept called ratio of positive interactions. It's embedded in almost all of our training, whether it's classroom management, foundations, any of the training that we provide, the coaching that we're providing this is a huge piece, because as humans, this is not natural to us. As humans, we mostly look for misbehavior in classes. That's what most of you had children of your own, am I guessing? Everybody had children of their own. And I'm going to guess that if you had a toddler or when they first started talking, the third word maybe after mama and dada was probably what? No, yeah. They don't emerge from the womb knowing that word. How did they learn it? Repetition. No, 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 no. Oh, no, 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 no. Right? And so we're sort of, that's kind of our practice. Unfortunately, we have youngsters who've learned the best way for me to get attention is to mess up. Sorry, I teach a lot from anecdotes, so let me tell you about Big D. I was teaching at Paul Lawrence Dunbar High School in Lexington, Kentucky. I had a group of 10 students with severe emotional behavioral disabilities who were in my class. It was a special education class. And about the 4th or 5th day of school, my principal came to me and he goes, "Who's that big kid in your class?" I said, "That's Big D. I'm not going to tell you his name." Big D was 6'6", 260 as a freshman. Football coach was drooling over him. Now, we had a big rule at Dunbar, and we're from the South, sorry. No hats. No hat. We had a strong no hat rule. So John Akers, who was my principal, came to me and he goes, "I've taken a hat off that kid for the last time. I want you to go call his mother and tell her I've got these 3 hats in my office, and if she wants these hats back, she needs to come get them." Now, I'd been at the IEP meeting with Big D's mom, and I didn't figure she was going to come get the hats, but I called her anyway, and here's what she said. "Tell Mr. Akers there's going to be a problem. He needs to come over here and get all the rest of these hats because there's going to be a problem. I don't care about those hats. He can just keep them, and he can come get the rest of them." So I went to him and I said, "Probably not going to work." And he said, "Well, I'll tell you what, the next time it happens, I'm putting him in in-school suspension." Now, I'd spent enough time with this kid that I knew we were going to need in-school suspension, but it was probably going to be for something worse than a hat. So I said, "Can I do a little investigation before we get there?" And he said, "Okay." And I said, "I'll probably come up with a plan. I think I can come up with a plan that we can solve this hat problem without having to use in-school suspension." So the next morning before school, I hid in the fine arts hallway. The band room was there, the orchestra room was there, the art room was there, and the gym was there. I hid in the art room door. I watched Big D as he came off the bus ramp. And now my head principal, stood in the exact same place in the foyer of the building every morning, greeted everybody, staff and students. I watched Big D come in. He didn't have a hat on. As he approached John Akers, guess what he did? Got in his backpack, put his hat on. John said, "Big D, you need to get that hat off." He said, "I'm sorry, Mr. Akers. I'm sorry. I forgot, Mr. Akers. I'm sorry." So he walks on. I'm following him, creeping along behind him. He gets to where Ray Woodyard, the associate principal, standing. And right before he gets to Ray, what does he do? Puts his hat on. "Big D, you need to put that hat back on." "Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Woodyard. Man, I keep forgetting." Turns the corner. Barbara Gateskill is my next associate principal, and she was his middle school principal, and she's just been promoted. She's known him since he was in the 6th grade. As he approaches Barbara, what does he do? Puts his hat on. She walks up. Now, she's a little short woman with some high heels on, about this tall. She reaches up. She has to stand up. She takes his hat, smacks him over the head with it, and says, "Put this away." And he said, "Ms. Gates, I keep forgetting. I'm so sorry." So at the end of that interaction, I went to John and told him exactly what would happen. And he said, "What would make a child do that?" I said, "Well, let's think about it." He knew that he had one way to get the attention of the 3 most powerful people in the school, simply by doing what? Misbehaving. I said, "We can solve this without any going to in-school suspension if you'll go along with it." And he said, "What do I have to do?" I said, "You have to walk 50 feet closer to him tomorrow before he gets off the bus," because he didn't have his hat on when he got off the bus. You can see him coming. He's 6'6", 260. You can see him. So the next morning, John moves about 50 feet closer, and he goes like this, "Big D, buddy, how you doing?" Big D walks right up to him. "I'm doing good, Mr. Akers. How you doing this morning?" "Good to see you. You don't have that hat on today. Good for you." He got on the radio. "Ray, he's coming your way." Ray walks 50 feet closer. Big D, buddy, how you doing this morning? Good job, Mr. Woodyard. How you doing this morning? Barbara, here he comes. We didn't have a hat problem. We've got to make sure that we are giving kids attention when they're doing the right thing instead of hanging around waiting for them to do the wrong thing, because they've learned real quickly. I got a 100% guarantee of getting people's attention. All I have to do is make a social error, because they're guaranteed to give me attention if I do that. So we really spend a lot of time teaching teachers how to do that, because it's not human nature. It is a concept that has been confirmed by research for over 6 decades. Some of you may be familiar with the Gottmans, who do marriage and family counseling, and they talk about this same concept, that most marriages are happier when there's more attention paid to each other, when we're behaving responsibly, than nagging each other. I was married for 39 years, and I think I tried to live by that, and it worked pretty well. I'm just sorry that my husband had the audacity to die on me before I was ready for him to do that. We also then teach our teachers, in addition to how to correct misbehavior, we also teach them strategies to use to correct misbehavior. So that textbook that you have in chapter 9, you've got about 24 or 25 correction procedures that are supported in research, that we know that these can be replicated. Unfortunately, we still have some folks who, not here necessarily, although I don't know, I haven't heard all of the stories, but I still encounter in my work that people who try to do ugly things to children to get them to stop misbehaving. Just recently, I was at a school down south in your state. I won't tell you which school district. And the assistant principal came to me, and he had gone to middle school here. So he's now the middle school assistant principal, but he'd gone to that middle school. And he came to me and he goes, "Oh, what are we going to do with the science teacher?" And I said, "Why is that?" Science teacher was making kids put books on their hands and stand like this. He said, "He did that to us when I was in school. What am I going to do with him?" And I said, "I don't know. I've got to think about this." And so he came to me and he goes, "I think I got it fixed." And I said, "What'd you do?" And he said, "I went to that science teacher who was my science teacher." And I said, "Remember when I was in your class, you used to make us put books on our hands? Hell, we'd all go to jail if we did that now, wouldn't we?" And the science teacher goes, "Yep, guess we would. Guess we would." End of problem. So we've really got to talk to people about what are research-based strategies to correct misbehavior, not just what was done to you, perhaps when you were in school, because a lot of those things have been outlawed. So same Stoic framework. Here are a couple of tools that we offer your staff to help them make those good decisions. This is a Stoic management checklist that teachers can assess themselves on how well I've put the pieces into a good classroom management plan. And then this is the other thing that we're asking schools to do, and that is that each teacher have a written classroom management plan. This is the form that we have in your text. There's also a download code where you can download all the forms that go along with this. And this is the classroom management plan that we ask all teachers to fill out, pre-K through 12, so that, again, one, their principals can support the decisions that they've made, and also support our teachers if there are questions about what's going on in the classroom. If parents raise questions, then our principals have good answers to that, because they know what teachers are doing in the classroom. So we ask that they're published, because we know that if it's written down, I'm more likely to be consistent in the application of that. In addition to our work in foundations and in classroom management, your district is also then, because we've done so much work in classroom management, one of my colleagues, Tricia Skiles, is working with your instructional coaches on how they can help coach teachers in some of the strategies that are listed in that text. And she's doing ongoing work. I think she'll be here next week, and she'll work with those instructional coaches, with your principals, and with your DLT, your district leadership team. Is that right? Your cabinet, what do you call it? Cabinet. I think she's going to work with all of those entities on how we can do, how everybody gets on the same page, and how we're really coaching teachers to help increase the skills that they have in classroom management. What questions or comments or concerns do you all have? Questions? Yes, sir. Yeah. Every state except Vermont, every state except for Vermont and Maine.
So how do you rate, since you're here in California now, obviously you've been in Southern California,
Yeah.
LA area, how do you rate California schools how do California schools compare to some of these other states? California used to be, native to California for a long time, and used to be the envy of the country.
Yeah.
Schools and
Yeah.
education.
Yeah.
And, now it seems to be our legislators using this as a social experiment in schools. In my opinion, not everybody. But what do you see California rating compared to Alaska?
It's hard to compare Alaska to anything because where I work in rural Alaska, it's so different. So we'll take Alaska out of the mix. We'll take Hawaii out of the mix. Same thing. Very, very different. One of the challenges that I think California has is class size. It's not unheard of for me to, especially down in Southern California, to go into a TK class of 30 kids. Rarely do I see that anywhere else of class size that large. I, by and large, have worked in Ventura County and LA County. And one of the things that I would say about those districts as well as yours, I also work in a couple of places in Northern California right now, I still see really good instruction. I see teachers who are, using the methods that are producing good results from kids. I still see a good rigor in classrooms where I am. In districts like yours, where we've really focused on classroom management, we see that behavior problems are subsiding. We had a real spike in behavior problems after the pandemic. I think we had kids who came back and they weren't ready. I think they'd lost their academic stamina. I think they had lost the ability to focus very long. And it was devastating for a lot of schools, but I'm seeing a lot of that subside. I don't see that you're an outlier from any other place in the country. As a matter of fact, I would still say that California still has the ability to recruit and retain really good teachers.
In California, we pay,
You do.
comparable.
Um,
Other
Yeah,
areas.
I don't see the number of either emergency certified teachers or one state I'm working in right now. They really they've got probably a fourth to a third of their teachers who haven't even been to college. They call them adjunct teachers. It's a state in the union. It's Oklahoma. I have, sir. There are some good schools there. I think the problem there is that politics so influence what goes on that the poor teachers in the Chicago public schools there's such turmoil in who's in charge, whether it's the mayor, whether it's a superintendent, whether it's kind of constant turmoil. But even in that sort of chaotic environment, there's some really good schools in Chicago.
Susan, I think you've covered like the structures of a tier one
Yeah.
system. And I want the board to understand that some of the behaviors and the things that we're seeing that are extreme are in tier two or tier
Yeah.
three.
Yeah.
And so those are some things that we definitely have work to do on within the district because it's absolutely a smaller percentage. And every one of those children is probably more individualized as to how we approach them as opposed to all students. And so for us, the learning is that as we are moving through tier one and getting good at tier one, how do we structure and build systems for tier two that incorporate and support those children that need that second layer?
Yeah.
And I know that as we've walked classrooms as cabinet, we've been in many classrooms that over 200 now at this point of the year, more than that, probably together we've been, but we've hit over 600 this week of classroom visits as a management team, leaders, principals, cabinet, the whole bit. And one of the things we do see is very structured classrooms. They're not often going to the expectations and having to share what those expectations are with their entire class. But what we realize is that is a system that is built to be there for those tier 2 and tier 3 students when they come in, and for people that are visiting the classroom to understand what the expectations are as well. We heard a lot this week when I've been in the room while you're working on foundations about guest teachers, about substitute paras, about other people that are showing up on the campus to support that are just visiting for a period of time who need to know what those basic systems are so that they can support all kids. And that gave me a huge amount of hope, knowing that they're already recognizing that it's not just about everybody that's there every day.
Right.
It's about those people that are joining and gathering. So.
Yeah. So we've done some work already, just from working with the foundations teams on some ideas that support kids at tier 2. Our goal is that we don't bog down teams, principals with endless meetings to try to figure out a plan for youngsters who need support at tier 2. If we can come up with some ready-to-use strategies at tier 2 that schools can already have developed, and then we sort of just plug kids into those, we found that sometimes solves the problem. And then that really allows all of our experts, our principals, our BCBAs, our school psychologists, our special education teachers, all those folks freed up to really provide support to those kids who need the most intense. They're the ones who take the most of our resources, and they're always going to be there. And every school has them. It used to be that we had 2 to 6% of the kids who needed support at tier 3. And since the pandemic, that certainly increased to probably closer to 10 to 12% of the school population is going to need support at tier 3. Here's the problem. And I'll just be quite honest with you. We really did a disservice to our, I'm sorry, this is just my own. Can I step on my soapbox for a minute?
Yeah, go ahead.
We did a horrible disservice to teachers 10, 15 years ago. At one time, we realized that literacy was so important that we had to teach our secondary teachers how to embed literacy practices into their curriculum. We taught math teachers how to embed literacy practices into their curriculum. We taught chemistry teachers how to embed literacy practices into their curriculum. We took the time to do that. We've known that we've got growing numbers of youngsters with behavior problems in our classrooms, and we did not do the same thing with behavior. We missed an opportunity 10 years ago to provide good instruction to all teachers about basic behavior information. Because I'll be honest with you, colleges of education are not doing a great job of this, in my opinion. We've got folks who come out of the College of Education and have little information about how to manage a classroom, which is, just drives me crazy. So I'm sorry, I will step off my soapbox. So now we have to do some cleanup, and we have to begin to give people more information, which I think is so wonderful that we've got CHAMPS, which is good information about basic behavior management in a kind of a nice text. But we missed the boat. Sorry. Nobody asked me to rule the world. If they had, I would have.
I'm gonna,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm going to step out of that soapbox because you mentioned an area that is near and dear to me, and that is the area of College of Education. I know that the TPE 7 or TPE 7 is now been embedded. The state of California requires it now, and that is the literacy piece.
Yes.
But unfortunately, in many colleges of education, the people who are credentialed to be able to go in and support those people who are trying to get their teaching credentials are not permitted to go into the classroom to observe it.
Oh.
So you find yourself observing a videotape lesson, and the videotape lesson does not allow you to see what's happening into the classroom and to give quick feedback on what the students are doing.
Yeah.
So that to me is a disservice. But we continue to hire teachers who could go through those programs.
Right.
Instead of saying, no, we want somebody who's been seen by a real person in a real classroom. We continue to do that because of a shortage. But having said that, I'm going to go out to another area that you brought up, or that was brought up by Rick, about education in California. I think what happens in many cases is that we tend to look at other places as being better. And we live in a place that is other people are striving to come to.
Yeah.
But one of the challenges that we continue to face is learning loss due to COVID.
Yeah.
And the learning loss is not at a straight line.
No.
So every child has their level of what they have lost in education. And the schools are required to give the instruction to raise the learning for all kids, regardless of how they entered to us. So the challenge continues to be there.
Yeah.
And so having said all of that, I came to the foundations, obviously, and I had the feel of what could possibly be. In your journeys, do you have a district that is requiring that all teachers embrace the safe and civil program instead of giving it as a choice? Do you have that in any district you've traveled through?
You all probably come the closest to not mandating, but making it so accessible. And I guess you sort of made it, okay, we're going to do it voluntarily. So you all probably come as close as anybody to sort of getting it out to the masses. Long Beach did a fabulous job several years ago, getting everybody involved. We did foundations in every one of their 60 whatever schools. A district in Texas, Conroe, Texas, I think one of their, we just hired one of the folks from there. I think she'll be in your all's district soon doing some training on something. I'm not sure exactly what. That we did foundations and champs in all of their schools, and it's maintained since 2007, 2008. They've maintained a high level of compliance with foundations and champs and training new teachers every year about foundations and champs. So those are a couple that come to mind that probably didn't mandate it to say you have to do it, but they made it so enticing that people wanted to, if that's a good way to see it. And I think that's pretty much your all's approach. You provided incentive for people to come in the summer to training, if I'm not
We
mistaken.
pay them to be here for training if they choose to attend. It is not a requirement. And I love how Ms. Okpara asked it, because I'm interested to know if there's a place that has everybody doing it. What the stand we have taken, just as a reminder for the board, is that we have a mandate that we will have a classroom management plan.
Yeah.
That classroom management plan will be published and provided to the site administrator. I have access to those because of my visits to schools. If the classroom is not structured and functioning, the teacher has an option to improve that
Right.
through structured support, either through coaching, which is anonymous and not evaluative,
Right.
or through the other side, which would be the administrator doing evaluation process to create improvement.
Right.
And finally, for us, it's what we train.
Mhm.
So if somebody wants to utilize classroom management that is not a CHAMPS or discipline in the secondary classroom, they can do it, but we want their classroom to run effectively
Yeah.
and efficiently for instruction.
Right.
And so I did write down when you said instructional management plan, because I very much appreciate that. Because that is what the goal of what this is all about, is to get instruction happening,
Yeah.
transitions happening.
Right.
And it is masterful when you see it.
Yeah.
It is inspiring to be in a classroom and watch a transition that is seamless,
Yeah.
with even a tier 3 kid in the room,
Yeah.
even with a tier 3 kid in the room, and see this happen. So, will we get, I'm interested to see over time, what is our percentage of people using CHAMPS? Because I see so many more high school classrooms using
Yeah.
Champs than I have ever seen since we began this
And,
5 years
and whether
ago.
you see CHAMP up
Right.
anywhere, looking for beginning routines, looking for ending class routines, looking for good transitions so that we're not losing. I think in that Champs book, the thing that stood out to me was the research that supported that teachers, if they're not skilled at transitions, meaning we're moving from one activity to the next, we're losing 70 minutes a day of instructional time due to poorly executed transitions. So we need our TK teacher over here teaching kids how to do those transitions really well. So we may not see CHAMPS up, but we also see those features of a really well-managed classroom.
And I do know that we do have some principals who have said on their campus, that is what it is.
Yeah.
We have guest teachers. We want them all to know that this is what we're doing.
Yeah.
And that's a site decision at this point. But I will tell you that at 2 sites, it is a mandate. That they have taken on and gotten agreement with their staffs.
Good.
And so you see it in every class. Kids don't have to guess when they move to another
Right.
grade level.
Right.
So
That's the other nice thing about a district having a comprehensive approach. If you have a district that has high mobility, and I'm going to guess there is some mobility in Apple Valley, it's really nice when kids move from building to building, the language is the same.
Correct.
You know, that the common language is apparent, and so kids can immediately feel comfortable. Oh, I know what this is about.
I'm also interested in finding out, as we continue to invest into this program, I'm interested in finding out the rate of expulsions that come from school sites that have fully embraced it versus those schools that have not fully embraced
Yeah.
it, to see if there's something to show that, because the students understand the expectations,
Yeah.
that the discipline is not as intense.
It's a little hard to measure because some states have different expulsion requirements than others. But I would encourage you to look at data, if we have it, if you can track data prior to the initiation of Champs and Foundations, comparing your own data might give us more insight than looking at maybe other districts in sorry, not Kentucky, but California. But I don't know that we would get good comparison data state to state because of the requirements of, some districts use expulsion for a lot of things, where I think California is pretty rigid for maybe 5 categories that you can expel. You all probably know that more than I do, but some states have very, very lax, kids are getting expelled for dress code violations. They're getting expelled for cell phone violations instead of things like drugs or weapons or sexual assault, et cetera, the things that I think California requires.
Well, I'll pull back on that question because it wasn't directed at other districts.
Oh.
I'm looking at our district.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry.
Because we are embracing it as a district and we're investing so
Yeah.
much as a district. So if we have a school that has decided that this is it, we want to see what the data
Yeah.
that comes out of that school, what it looks like.
Right.
Because then you can use that same data to show to other sites to see what the report is showing
Right.
in terms of students who are getting out of sync.
Right.
Yes, Ms. Buchanan.
I had clarified down here, it might even work just for the same school to compare their data before to their data after, so that it's the same school site, so you're not even comparing one school to another school, because it might vary school
Yes.
site to school site, but kind of a before and after.
That will work.
And I do see the benefit to that for others for deciding if this is a direction that they want to go to on their school site for all. So that's great.
We
do
asked
have that.
the foundations teams to collect and analyze behavioral data every 6 to 9 weeks and present those data to their staff every 6 to 9 weeks. Traditionally, that's happened at the end of a school year, that we go, okay, this is how many absences we had, this is how many suspensions, this is how many, expulsions, this is how many trips to the office we have. We really want to get that more in real-time data so that we can affect change if we need to. If we see a group of students that's really struggling, what do we need to do differently for them? So looking at those data more frequently and having the entire staff examine those data, and then you all asking for those data more frequently, I think would be beneficial to you all as well.
The data piece is a great segue to a discussion that happened. We had a parent complaint that came in, hit the school site, hit my office, hit HR, and it wasn't atrocious, the complaint, but it was a foundations team decision about a drop off and pickup of students on a campus. And when I asked the principal how that decision was made, it was a foundations team decision. So I asked if they could go back to the foundations team, and now that they had it implemented, were people utilizing it? What were the obstacles? All of the things that they should be doing. It didn't wait 6 weeks because it was already an issue, and they sat together, they reformatted, and there's no issue.
Got fixed.
And so that's the other real powerful part of this is not only are they reviewing the data every 6 to 9 weeks, but they have the ability to revamp and change direction to support students and staff appropriately.
That's the beauty of having that team. They're fairly nimble, that if something comes up that, oh, this is not working, we don't have to wait until the end of the school year to make drastic changes in the structures of our procedures in the building. We can do it almost immediately. What other questions or concerns do you have? I know I've sound like a cheerleader or a. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir, I do. I am. They vary all over the country. The most stringent one that I'm seeing now is Santa Barbara Unified. It started with the middle school that I was working in, and they got sick of cell phones, and so they decided that they were going to institute a cell phone policy that students could not have cell phones visible during the school day. They could have them at lunch, but no other time during the school day. If they saw the cell phone, a teacher first asked the student to put it away. If they saw it again, the teacher did not attempt to take the cell phone away from the youngster. They asked the administrator to become involved. So they called the administrator to the class, the administrator would come, so that we kept the power struggle away from the teacher and the student, because we want to maintain that relationship. So they did ask a principal or assistant principal to step in, take the cell phone. It went to the office, and parents had to pick it up. The second time that happened, the student was not allowed to bring the cell phone for a couple of weeks. That was the rule. And if it happened the third time, then the cell phone was checked in at the office in the morning. Now, the problem was they had some kids who had a fair amount of expendable income, and so they had more than one cell phone. So, without searching kids. So I am seeing more and more schools ban cell phones. Los Angeles Unified has banned cell phones completely. I've not seen yet any data to support how well it's working. Teachers, I think, are far more favorable to not having cell phones in schools. The one thing I did see recently that I think is going to cause an issue for us is parents being so concerned that they don't have access to their students because of an emergency. When we just had the act of violence, the last one, parents were very concerned. If they didn't have cell phones, how would I know my kid is safe? And I get that. I get, as a parent, I'd want to know, is my kid okay? So I think that's always going to be an issue that we'll have to wrestle with as we think about electronic devices.
We do have one school site that started the year off with off and away for the day.
Yeah.
They have had enormous success with
Yeah.
that, and procedures and protocols that everybody's involved in. One of our largest schools, Sitting Bull Academy, and the issue of emergency situations where a parent would want to have access. They explain to each parent, as long as that would not put their child at risk.
Right.
And so the example to that would be an active shooter. In the middle of that, we're not
Absolutely.
going to have phones going off.
Yeah, we can't.
But the minute it's safe for those children to
Yeah.
take them out, they will allow them to
Yeah.
do that. If there's a shelter in place, that type of thing. So our current district policy allows for the school to make that decision before any mandates of
Yeah.
no school cell
Right.
phones in school that that is currently just a big battle for local control versus a state mandate. So just one of many things that the state is trying to tell
local school boards how to operate in the settings.
And then Santa Barbara started with the one school who tried it, and then it became a district policy that all schools are following a similar policy. I've got it in writing if anybody wants to look at it. I've got Santa Barbara's.
Well, the problem with it too is almost daily in Apple Valley, there's a lockdown at the school, and it's not really a problem at the school, it's a problem in
Yeah,
the neighborhood.
yeah, yeah.
The local sheriff's department is conducting a search or something, and so they lock the school down. And then it gets on social media, and it's like, well, how come the school's locked down, Sycamore Rocks or whatever?
Yep.
And then the parents are, that's-
Scared to death. Yeah, they're scared.
Right. Real quick, too, before we wrap up, not that we have to wrap up,
Oh,
I wanted to get this out. What's your opinion on armed police officers on campus? We're seeing some school districts that are going away from that.
Yeah.
And then I was called by a group out of San Francisco about it. Their whole take is that it's intimidating to the kids, that they see armed
Yeah.
police on campus.
The
I'm
district,
talking high school mostly.
the district where I taught, we have our own police force, and they're armed.
We do here.
and they're armed. However, they're the same folks who greet kids at the door every morning. I was a teacher who had a kid with a weapon in my classroom. Scared me to death. I thought he had a knife. I kept saying, why don't you just give me that knife? And he kept saying, I don't have a knife. And all the rest of my kids are like, so finally I heard it and I said, you need to give me that knife. And he put a gun in my hand. It was a 25 caliber Raven, loaded. I was grateful that we had a police force right next door to me. So I grew up as a teacher. I'm not growing up. I don't mean growing up, but I've always had an armed police officer. I think they had great relationships with our kids. I don't see that any of our youngsters were scared. However, I'm going to say this. At that time, we were not doing as many active shooter drills. So now, I'm not really sure that the presence of a gun doesn't scare kids. I think we have to go a long way for those officers then to really be seen as a resource and not somebody to be scared of. And so that's work that our officers may have to change their perspective just a little bit to really learn kids' names, not be seen as somebody who's carrying a gun. And I think that's what our officers, at least in the district where I work, I think what they.
agree. I support it too.
Yeah.
There is a push, or you do see certain districts that are going away from that.
Yeah.
For various reasons.
Yeah.
But I just wanted.
Yeah, we've always had, they've always been armed. We usually have 4 or 5 officers in each high school. Our high schools are very large in Fayette County. We've got 2,800 to 3,000 kids. So we usually have a team of 3 or 4 officers in each building. They also then support our middle schools that are nearby because we have a lot of kind of campuses that are, schools close by. So they support the middle schools and also the elementary schools in that feeder pattern.
I believe that having police on campus helps with maintaining, I don't want to say control, but keeping the lid on possible problems that could, we're just talking about discipline, that could happen if they were not there. I mean, it's kind of like a deterrent.
I've always felt like it helped, to be honest with you, as a teacher in a high school where we had officers. I was always grateful they were there. I will say this, the presence of adults, period, in schools is the best deterrent. Like I said, if I got to be queen of the world, there would not be a secondary school where teachers were not supervising during passing periods. The only way to keep our buildings safe is to have eyes on kids. If you've got a hallway full of teenagers and there's no adult supervision in that hallway, you're asking for trouble. And so trying to get, it's okay.
An interesting Zoom meeting.
I think the more adults, the better. Whether they're armed or not, we need to get adults and not to be mean to kids, but just to say, hey, how you doing? Nice to see you. Hey, we're going to have some fun 5th period. Oh, you got your hair cut, looking nice. Just so kids know, hey, we're not out here by ourselves.
Yeah.
So whether it's an officer or not, the more principals should be I worked for a fabulous high school principal. And I remember being in his office with a set of parents who were angry. I don't know if any of you all, I'm sure you've been there. Y'all been there. And I remember it was just about passing period, and he looked at these very angry parents and he said, I hope you can appreciate that I've got 2,500 kids that are going to be out in my hallways in about a minute, and I need to be out there. So I'm going to ask my secretary to bring you a cup of coffee or a soft drink, and I'll be back in about 8 minutes and we'll continue this conversation. He did not let a passing period go by that he was not in the hallway unless, and if the superintendent was there, he'd say, come on and walk with me. But he was, all of our administrators were highly visible, which made our teachers highly visible. So it really trickles down for supervision. But yes, I agree. I think I always felt safer knowing that those guys were there and they were supporting me. But again, they didn't feel like they were there to catch criminals. They felt like they were there to support kids.
It's a
Yeah,
whole different
it
way of
is.
policing
Yeah.
than
Yes, it is. It is.
in the city.
Yeah, yeah.
Campus, yeah.
And Rick, I really appreciate that because I want to point back to the last board meeting we had when we introduced Officer Gotti as a new employee in the district. And I think it was the loudest applause in the room the entire evening.
Really?
What a wonderful representation.
Oh.
People were thrilled that he was here. I have asked principals that they are not calling the school police in to help discipline a student on an ed code violation because I don't want them to be seen as the disciplinarian. I want them to be seen as the person that's there to help protect and support.
Yeah.
And the other thing, just today on a campus, one of our officers came in dealing with a situation, and she was struck because a student was being removed from the school by Child Protective Services, and she was the person that the child thought could save her. You're a police officer. You can keep me here. And it was a hard moment for her.
yeah.
And so those relationships are being built every day by those officers, and I'm so proud of them for that. So a little emotional, but
Yeah.
It's
They're invaluable.
happening.
They're invaluable to school. Our officers in each of our high schools greet kids every single morning at the door. Really they're really looking to see how you're feeling. Is anybody under the influence? Is anybody carrying something that looks like it could be suspicious? I know they're looking for more, but you would never guess that. You just see them going, good morning, how are y'all this morning? And they're checking kids out just to make sure everybody's safe. And everybody feels safer that way, I think. What else? We have a website if you want to ever go on and look at encorapublishing.com. I always give everybody my cell phone number. If you have questions or concerns that you didn't feel like you wanted to ask tonight in front of everybody or on camera, I never mind somebody texting me a question or calling me. Again, I'm in different time zones. But if you'll text me first, I'm always happy to answer questions. We provide full service even after we're gone to support schools in all their efforts. So we're always accessible is what I would like to say. So if you want to write my cell phone number down, here it is. I've given it to every teacher across the country. 859-227-0997. You can text me anytime you want to.
I'll
with
send
a
it to
question.
them, Susan.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Then they
That'd
don't
be
have to
great.
put it in
That'd be
their
great.
phone.
The one gal, I was going to say, the one gal that's coming into your district, Denise, has just left one of our really good districts in Texas, the one that we did this through in all of their schools. While she's here, you may want to bring her in and pick her brain just a little bit about, did they mandate? Because I think they did. I'm not quite sure that they mandated that everybody has to do this. I know that they've got longitudinal data for probably 10 to 12 years about the effects of this. So you might want to pick Denise's brain because we just stole her from that district. So we're happy to steal her. She'll be a good asset to your district and do some training with your teachers. I just want to say thanks for giving me an opportunity to share with us what I believe is going to be wonderful in your district. Again, I wouldn't be as old as I am, working as hard as I work, if I didn't truly believe that this can be a real huge change for schools in the right direction. So I applaud your efforts. We're so grateful that you all chose us to bring this important information to your school district. And if we could ever be of any service to any of you all, please let us know. So don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Oh, you don't have to. You don't have to clap. Do
Okay.
you have other business that you're doing?
Yeah,
Just
we're
closing.
going to close.
Okay.
Superintendent's comment.
With Safe and Civil presentation today, I just wanted to remind the board that I likely will ask Kylie to bring a draft change to the board calendar for the January board meeting so that the board can attend the Safe and Civil mini conference, which has been an invite to our board because of the implementation within the district. And it would just shift the board meeting potentially the week before, which I believe we can still do based on the winter break, and we just have to post, and we think it would be doable. January. So that we would not have to leave early to come back from Safe and Civil training as a board. So,
Maybe Alaska and Nome. I was just saying, you're good.
if you're leaving. Riding a sleigh to the
Thank you,
school. Not kidding. That's all I have.
Thank you. Board comments, Mr. Bender? Mr. Bender?
No, great. Hey, all schools in Kentucky that big, that's why their high school football teams are so good.
In the large cities, they are. Lexington and Louisville, they are. Other than that, we've got some little ones.
Mhm.
Far eastern, far western Kentucky, where it's more rural area, they're smaller. And a lot of them are combined,
Yeah.
schools and they all combined, so yeah.
Mrs.
No, it's
Buchanan?
good.
I just want to say thank you, Susan, for coming down and, well, I mean, you're here all week anyway, but thank you for taking the time because I know this is a really long day for you to train all day and then come train us as well. But we appreciate it because we've been hearing a lot about Safe and Civil and Champs and Stoic for a very long time. I know a few of us are educators or former educators, so we're familiar with some of the alphabet. I was a PBIS coach for my high school for many years, but I was not familiar with Champs or Stoic until I came to Apple Valley. And last year, and I was walking through many schools, and I kind of had heard about it. And then there was two schools in particular that they're just doing a phenomenal job. And so I guess they're cohort one. I found out tonight. So, but yeah, so we've got some that are doing a great job. So it's really nice to learn more about it now. So thank. Oh, okay. Well, yep, those were the two. So thank you for doing this, and thank you guys for bringing her. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Arcee? Mr. Raleigh?
Thanks, safe travel.
And for me, no comments. Thank you so much.
Enjoy the Northern Lights.
I've never seen,
Um,
11 years, I've never seen it. Been here 11 years and I've never seen it.
Future items, does any board member have any future items they would like to bring forward? Mrs. Buchanan? No? The only future item I would like to bring forward will be the calendar for for Footsteps to Freedom. I'd like to bring it back for the next, they have a whole list of the schedule of when it will be, to add it to us, for us so we can see what that calendar looks like. Thank you. I am going to ask, there being no further business to come before the Board of Trustees, it is recommended that the meeting be adjourned. I need a motion.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned.